Hello and welcome to this video on the tool for using it to make some interesting artifacts. So what I've got here is just the default scene of the player in one corner and a trigger in the other corner that doesn't really do anything until you press some keys. So what does that mean? I'll show you in the script editor. So there's the mini script window, which is kind of just for quickly glancing through it, but you really want the big script editor to make any changes to code. Not just because it has a nice color highlighting for code, but because you can also search through different types of commands. So if you wanted to load textures or set a texture on something like a trail, there you go. Basically, there's lots of commands that you have access to for controlling different types of objects and values. There's also built-in functions that run every time that something happens, and you can trigger it to filter for them. It shows you all the different types of tags that you can use. So if you're in the editor, you can use these tags. These tags you can use to find things, but you can't actually change objects to use them. They're very specific, so the head of the player, left hand, right hand, index finger of left and right hand. If you're in the editor or if you're in the game, you can do lots of interesting things that way. And when you click on something, it will show you basic how to use it or what it does. And you can check if you have a type of component, check if you um, have an object and move it if you do. There's also templates, and if you choose one of these, it actually replaces the code up here with the template. You can also load files externally if you have them saved somewhere. There's a bit more in-depth things. If you know about Unity, you know about layers. So those are things that objects can exist on, and they change how they interact. Everything's on the default layer normally. If you don't want it to collide with anything, you can put it on no collide, or only collide with itself, or only collide with others, not colliding with self. Lots of different features here that are more advanced if you have Unity experience. There's also here the sprite sorting. So if you're dealing with sprites in 2D, that also matters as well. And then there's some basic Lua scripting, teaches you how to make sub actions and timers. I'll get into what those are in a minute. Um, Everything that we code is in a language called Lua, but it's all being piped down into C# and Unity Engine. And for example, here's how to use the actions and the escaping. There's also a basic Lua tutorial you can open. But for now, we're just going to use the script that's already here. This is using an older style of ensuring that the whole code runs every frame. Basically, it sets a run interval, which means for this object, run all of this code every 0.1 seconds. There's a newer way to do it that I'll show in another script, but this is the way I started originally. So what happens is it does a check in just a variable called openEd. It checks if you press the letter Q. If Q is pressed, then we set the blur camera value to true. If E is pressed, it turns blur camera off. So blur camera is this global variable. Basically decides if the game is going to blur the camera or not. And by default, it uses the main camera. Because I edited a script, it's not going to just let me play. I'll have to save it or reload. I'm just going to reload. I didn't change anything. So blur camera, hit play. So what does that really mean? Right now, nothing, but I hit Q, and now you can see that the background of the sky no longer renders. You can make some really interesting art that way. And if I want to put it back, I just hit E, and now it's all back. So Q does this, and E does that. Pretty simple. Go back to the editor here. So like let's say we have this and we want to make it more interesting. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we take from the drawing commands some constant particles and rotate them so that they shoot upwards. So it should be about 270. And we'll make them quite big and various colors. So these ones will be red. We'll clone that. Make these ones blue. Clone that. And make these ones green. And now we'll try it again. So I'll just call it 00, 0, just because it's a simple name. And then when I hit Q now, There we go. We're making some interesting swirls just by rotating the camera. That's generative art in a nutshell. But there's other features I'll show you. So there's another one here where you generate lines from code. So here's how they work. I have 3 individual objects for generating lines. They have a line renderer. They are actually, if you look at them, they're called line loops. They make a loop between the start and the end point. So this one creates a point at 0, 0, 0, x, y, z. Another point at 4, 0, 0, and then a point in the middle. And the middle point actually, so this is the new way of doing things every frame, the function on frame tick. dt is what's called delta time. The only thing you need to know about dt is that if you multiply by it, it turns into every second. So if you want something to happen 60 times a second, you multiply it 60 times dt. And that'll account for variable frame rate depending on your computer performance. It's more of a game dev term. So frame count gets added to by dt every frame. Then the middle position, we're using some math, sine and cosine to create a circular type motion. And we change the second point. So this is point 0, point 1, point 2. So the second point gets changed, and we change its mid x and mid y because that value changes. So if I were to save this and run it, you'll see that that one I was just talking about is a simple triangle where the middle point is moving in a full circle around. And if we change the code, and we could do this in the editor, I'll show how the editor editing works. So if I click on this and click test script, you can see it's running there. Now, down below where I said we can go up by dt, watch this. If I change that from plus dt to plus dt times 12, you'll see that it does it again. And because I didn't clear the points, it actually added extra points. So there's one here that clears the points before you do it. Obj.clearLine. And I forgot to do that in this one, so I'll add that line in there. And now you see, there we go. So we made it go faster. And if we wanted to, we could do it so that the z value also goes up by mid x times mid y. And you'll see now it's doing some interesting effects there. This one here is just a simple triangle. And what we do instead of changing the points is we just rotate the whole object. So the points and the object rotation are separate. And this one here is again just a simple shape, and we rotate it. And it doesn't have to be a 2D flat shape. So for example, if I do this and I add an extra point, and we'll put that point at 444, you'll see that now it's a 3D shape. But you'll also notice that it only creates a complete loop. It will not just draw between each point. It makes a solid loop. Anyway, we've pretty much messed with that pretty good. Let's take a look at something else you could do. There's one called star particles. And what that is we have a star object here. And all it does is it's got the tag special, and we make sure we store that at the start. And then over here, the script will try to, first of all, find the object called special and store it, and then use it all in one line. Technically, this could be 2 lines. So I could do this. Star equals that. And then local star equals store the star object. Set the particle mesh to the star object. And then change the size. And if I run that script first, and then run this script, there we go. We've stored the star and use it as a particle now. And you can rotate the field. Very cool. And you can see that no matter what we do with the original star, it doesn't matter. It's already been copied over. But if I tried to run it now, the star would be missing. You can also load video feeds. So if you wanted to load a video that's already stored, just test that. There's a video of me testing in my room. So you can work with that too. You can load webcam feeds. So if I run this, you'll see it should load a webcam and it's on the other side. Nope. It might not be happy with me using the webcam. Probably because I'm already recording some audio here. But okay, we'll just let that be. The water pool is an example of how you can use the terrain to make a complete looking water, even though officially that water is still just that one big block, but now it looks more natural with the terrain. Um, the VR is supported as well if you have an Oculus Rift or an Oculus Quest. You can put your levels on there. So Trails VR is 2 trail objects that track your hands. That one's fun to play with. Just because you can run around and make some interesting shapes with the trails. This one here is a simple demonstration of how you can actually scroll a texture. So if I run test script, it's probably not going to run because that's not going to be true. So I'll reload the level and demonstrate what that looks like. So I hit play, and there you go. You can see that it scrolls the texture over time. So you can make some interesting effects out of that too. Like if you control the speed, you can make a waterfall effect on top of particles together. Combine things together basically. You can join levels together. So it's just a simple level that basically when the player touches it with the body or their VR hands, it will go to another level. This is kind of an uglier way of writing actions. The easier way is to basically separate this out into a function of its own. You can make your own functions and then call the function when the player touches something. That's an action basically though. Scripting doesn't just have to be done in the editor side. You can actually open the script editor from a command. So for example, if I go into here and reload that level, where did I put that level? There we go. And I hit play and I hit Q. You can see the script editor comes up and it's actually the script editor for that object. So that's pretty cool that way. And it looks like I accidentally clicked open file. Okay. So there's that level. There's a lot of levels here for interesting things to look at. You can also experiment with other views of camera. So this camera here detects if you press the letter E and it will turn the camera on. So by default, you have your normal camera. You press E and you've got this interesting side camera. So normal camera, side camera. That's pretty cool that way. You can play audio files. So this script here is a trigger, and when the player touches the trigger, it sets the text and it triggers the audio to play. Make sure you load the audio into the file. Each object can only play one audio at once, so you can make separate objects and trigger them remotely if you have to. Bing. But yeah, you can see that as I touch it, Bing. It plays an audio file and it adds text. Okay. What else is interesting here? You could make some really big objects. So these are huge to scale. You can make them even bigger if you want to. So you can really experiment with the art. And because the player can fly, you can get some interesting effects out of that. Don't be afraid to place objects. I mean, if it starts to lag, that's probably a good sign to slow down, but it seems to handle them pretty well. This is just a simple campfire scene, so this object here sets a light color and light intensity, and when you run it, you can see the glow it gives off. And you can make it also affect a wider area. Some of these objects, like the light spheres, they will disappear when you're actually in the game. They just show up in the editor. You could do paths. So these path points here have scripts on them. It's pretty much just a matter of use the template. So you can make the path follower, a waypoint, or an endpoint. And as the object goes through them, this one follows them randomly. It can run through them. They can trigger scripts when you go through them. Lots of interesting things there. You can also experiment with the sun. So in this scene here, there's some trees, and then there's an object in the scene. Oh, there is no object in the scene yet, so I'll place one. I'm going to go ahead and place a trigger in the scene. And yeah, it's there now. Going to click on that trigger and choose a sun preset of glow from below. This one's pretty cool. So I chose that preset, it filled in the code, I saved the level and I run it. And you'll see now this level is lit from the bottom. So there's no shadows, but there is still light. Pretty cool effects there. Um, the rest of it is really just interesting code, interesting examples. There's nothing that I would say you're going to be really using to start with for making generative art. I think most of the things you'll be doing are probably looking at blur cam, placing some objects, maybe doing some basic animations through waypoints possibly. You might even change the player avatar. So this one is a good example. It's basically you place the player, you place an object. You don't actually need to know how to do this script because there's a built-in example for it. It is called parent to player, or sorry, make object into a fake avatar, which also parents the player but also hides the player. So if you do that and you run it, so I'll save it and then give it a run. Now I am the pepper robot. You can still fly and everything, and it doesn't animate, but it will let you move around, do things with it. So that's kind of the basics of getting around the script editor, getting around objects. The one thing I'll point out again is how I did the star particles, because it uses a trick that you're going to use for a lot of finding and playing with objects. So the star has the tag special. I made sure to also store it by script just so it's especially stored before the code runs. And then the particles, all they do is they find the object here. At the same time, they store it to the mesh and they resize it. And you can see without running this one first, that one doesn't do its job. And this object here doesn't have to be visible. You could hide it under the floor. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of using the tool here. The only other one that I didn't mention is the mirror, which is basically just a camera that you can interface with. So you could, for example, go to blur cam, place in a mirror, which is under drawing. Nope, sorry, it's under cameras. There's only one mirror allowed per scene, just for performance reasons. Rotate that round, pick it up, scale it up a little bit, and then save and run it. And now, if you disable the sky, you can see that camera still has the sky. So the mirror will not hide the sky unless you explicitly get rid of the depth buffer on it. But that's pretty advanced stuff. We're not going to get into that today. And there's an object there that didn't disappear. That's kind of interesting. But yeah, otherwise, just experiment. There's one more thing you could do, which I didn't show yet. So you can load models from Google Poly. So what that means is if I go to Poly load stress test, here's some objects that are just triggers with nothing that they do except for they load Google Poly models from the Google Poly library. So when you search on Google Poly, you'll find that they have this little code. You put the code in, and when you run it, you're going to see that it loads someone's art from Tilt Brush or any other tool. and you can navigate around it. So you can also bring in objects from other locations. So for example, I think one of these is kind of a little temple type thing. Yep. And then you can scale it up. And save it. And when you run it, it will reload it automatically from the web. Notice that you have some real detail in these, and the animations are preserved. It's cool that way. Um, Otherwise, if you have videos, audio, photos, and you want to load them from the web, that works as well. So these images here are not loaded from local hard drive space. They are loaded straight from the web, as you can see there and there. So yeah, if you have any other questions or concerns, you can always message me at any time, and I'll be happy to answer them. But hopefully that gets you started with making some interesting art in 3D with this editor and then trying it out. Thanks very much. Bye.